Hello, welcome to the Sonar Shack aboard USS KIDD. If you have watched the movie Greyhound, you have seen an approximation of this, but it wasn't quite a perfect recreation. This is at the rear side of the pilot house on the bridge level. So directly in front of us, forward, is the pilot house with the helm and the engine order telegraph. And between us, over on the port side, is the captain's sea cabin, just to give you the lay of the land. We're here today to talk a little bit about sonar, and we have our very special guest, Evan from USS KIDD. We do allow submariners aboard KIDD. We're trying to convince him to come to the light side of the force and join the destroyers of the fleet.
I'm still tempted by the dark side, I'm sorry.
I know you are. Well, you're wearing black, so go figure. Let's talk a little bit about destroyer sonar versus submarine sonar.
So submarine sonar is a little different in that during World War II, fleet-type submarines, they're going to use sonar largely listening for other vessels in order to hide from them. Destroyers, other type of escort vessels that usually pop up after you blow up a carrier or something sizable.
Frigates, DEs.
They're going to be watching out for that. Now, it's interesting, I was just going through the sonar manual for World War II submariners, and it's actually a little bit humorous. Whoever was writing this understood that a lot of these people aren't going to be super familiar with this equipment. A lot of them are going to be reading it when they're going through school, so they're learning new bits and pieces. So the introduction, in my opinion, is a little funny because it's emphasizing how important a sonar man's job. When the submarine is underwater, the sonar is the primary method for detecting vessels. And that is your survival right there. If you make too much extra noise or anything that attracts a destroyer, you're cooked. It's a very, very important job, and you want to know where everything is. When they were training these sonar men, they made sure that they understood that while schooling is important, reading manuals, very, very important. All you men out there, read the manuals for those ships and computers. I know us men are stubborn. No, we don't need to read manuals. Read manuals, it could save your life one day. What they emphasized was, that's all good, but you need experience actually doing it. So they emphasize that while this is all set in stone, the real world isn't perfect. It doesn't work the way a textbook does. So what they would train them to do is look out for sounds such as aquatic sounds. They were familiar with certain types of drumfish, make drum noises, croakers croak, whales, make all sorts of sounds, but perhaps most importantly, they were being trained how to detect certain types of vessels. Propellers make noise, other parts of the ships make noise, depth charges make noise in the water. Splashes, exactly, so they can hear the splashes in the water. One thing I do want to emphasize, and this is usually played up a little bit in World War II movies, especially one that I saw, not World War II, but it's a submarine movie, Down Periscope. There's a scene where they're trying to hide from the enemy, and one of the guys drops some change, and the sonar man says, he just dropped 35 cents. Yeah. That's pushing it too far. There's other more serious movies where, I believe the movie Below, which is a horror film, a guy turns on a record player, and that attracts the noise of the destroyers. Some of that is Hollywood. The enemy's detection systems were not that good.
Now, talking about the detection systems, Cold War submarines, and we've got pieces of the USS Baton Rouge, which was a Los Angeles class attack sub, SSN. They actually have rubber coatings on the decks as you're walking through, these rubber tiles, and they're acoustic tiles to absorb sound. So the sonar today, much more advanced than the World War II stuff, much more advanced than the Cold War stuff. So it's possible they might hear music if you got it cranked up really loud, or some sort of loose machinery that's rattling that normally would be locked down, say a cabinet door or something. So the new stuff is very sensitive, whether or not they can tell you dropped 5 pennies, a nickel, 2 dimes, whatever. I agree, it's pushing it a little too far.
Although that might be classified information.
That could very well. They don't announce the top speed of the submarines these days, so it's always in excess of. Even this stuff was top secret back in its day. KIDD, by the way, for those that have come and toured her, or for those that are seeing the Sonar Shack for the first time, KIDD is not showing a World War II sonar setup because we couldn't find one. When Tim Rizzuto first started restoring the Kidd, he was on the lookout for the old World War II sets, and they just did not exist. Or if they did, they were already in a museum somewhere. This is Kidd's Korean era sonar set. Never got the upgrades further along because the Fletchers were being phased out as time went on. So why put a newer set on an old ship? They trained them on the Korean sets, on the reserve training when she was a reserve ship from 59 to 64, and then they moved them on to a new ship with newer technology. So this is what it looked like in Korea. The location is the same as World War II. One of the things in Greyhound, we had a gentleman, Mr. Tom, friend of ours from across the street at the old state capitol.
Not Tom Hanks.
Not Tom Hanks. He's a friend of ours too, hopefully, but Tom from across the street was a sonarman aboard a DE, and he was teaching Chet Hanks and the other actors that were working the sonar for the movie about how it worked. And his big thing was, it's not visual. Hollywood always shows you a scope rotate. That's radar. That's not sonar. Sonar, he was telling us, is basically a dot in the middle of the screen, and when you send a pulse out, World War II sonar was not omnidirectional for a pulse going out. It was one directional. So if he has the emitter pointed straight out to port, it's going to have a line going straight out to port. And if it doesn't hit anything and have a bounce back, then it disappears from the scope and you never see it again. But if you hit something, say the USS KIDD, then you have the pulse come back to you to the center. And the timing and all that tells you the distance. All of this, the range and everything, is determined by the salinity of the water, the temperature of the water.
Other noises in the water.
How noisy it is, true.
One thing they mentioned is, even though Hollywood can get it a little silly sometimes, the submarine does make noise. They had the sonar men get familiarized with noises on the submarine. The periscopes, the torpedo data computer made noise, and I highly doubt that this would happen, but sonar men needed to understand the noises around them they had headphones on, and they wanted them to make sure that they weren't distracted. The torpedo data computer would have been right behind them. It makes a little bit of noise, and they would have been familiar with that. They had to be very, very good at canceling out any other outside noise, including conversations, guys talking to them. They had to make sure that they were focused on their job. Another thing is that, especially for submariners and sonar men, there's going to be long periods of boredom, punctuated by brief moments of sheer terror and fear. They tried to train submariners to be prepared for that. 95% of the time, going to be bored. You're going to be doing your job, you're going to be on a routine. Then the rest of the 5%, you have no control over. You just have to learn to deal with it. Right. And they wanted the sonar men trained for that, so they wouldn't panic. They would stay on their station. This is very important. The sonar men, in some ways, if a submarine is submerged, for lack of a better phrase, they're the periscope. They're what tells the captain and everyone else on the ship what's in the area, what's around them. So what the sonar man says could be, great relief. I don't hear anything else. The escorts are turning away. Or it could be something that could strike fear in the hearts of men. I hear a lot of screws. I think they're escorts. They're coming this way. So very, very important job.
And there's an easy way from what Tom Irwin, wonderful gentleman, rest in peace, he told me the escorts have a higher pitch and a faster RPM. The carriers, the battleships, the troop ships, Liberties, Victories, all those cargo type ships, tankers, have a slower rotation and a lower pitch as a result. It's a trade basically that you can only learn by doing. Now, I wanted to touch on the ranges a little bit. You and I are still kind of in the dark about the exact ranges, and it's because it's so nebulous because of all the conditions that can affect the range. But I believe the average for a destroyer sonar in the Cold War, in the 50s, 60s, for what Kidd would have had with this equipment, would have been 5,000 yards. And if I remember correctly, you and Greg Williams at Bakuna had told me y'all believe that sonar for KIDD and Bakuna and y'all's sisters in the fleet were probably somewhere around 2,500?
Around 2,500. I always like to emphasize this. Submarines during World War II are surface vessels that could dive for short periods of time. So, when submarines are on the surface, they're going to be using radar to help detect things, but when it's submerged, strictly sonar. I would say about 2,500 yards. As you said, it could be affected by different things, different noises, temperature, all that. Right. About 2,500 yards, I would say, which is pretty good for World War II. But when a submarine is going to attack during World War II, at least American fleet-type submarines, they're going to be submerged during the day, and they're going to be surfaced at night. The surface night attack, you're using radar. If you're staying on the surface, you're going to be using radar and sonar. You're going to attack, submerge, use sonar. If it's a daytime submerged attack, you're going to be using sonar, firing, and getting out of the way. One of the reasons why it was often difficult for submariners to confirm what they sank is as soon as they fired their torpedoes, they were heading in the opposite direction.
Right.
Sonarmen also were the ones who were often responsible for helping confirm whether or not a ship sank. They're going to be looking for breaking up noises.
Right.
They're going to be looking for sound of debris. Just sounds like something's being destroyed. They're going to be listening for explosions. Sometimes they would think they sank something because they heard an explosion, they heard other noises that sounded like breaking up sounds, and they couldn't get a visual on it, so they reported something sank. Sometimes it was true, sometimes it wasn't. That was just the way it was. It was very difficult to track. As soon as you fire, you're getting the hell out of there.
And it's a game of cat and mouse, and that's no better exemplified than in Greyhound if you've watched the movie, because the Germans developed this noisemaker called, I think it's the pillbox. I can't remember, Piffen.
Something Burford. No.
Yeah, it's German, but it stands for pillbox. And it just emits air and spins in the water when the U-boat drops it to confuse the sonarman in the escort.
As he said, submarines had that too. American submarines did. KIDD had one. I believe they used it during KIDD's 6th War Patrol and it didn't work. It was a calculated risk to use those because you will see in movies they'll use that. What they often don't mention is when a submarine is doing that, you are telling whatever is on the surface that something is there. And you are hoping that either they think the thing already sank if you use discharge oil. Eugene Fluckey, Admiral Fluckey of the USS Barb, did that when he attacked the Japanese in a port. He used oil to divert their attack, but that's calculated. You're telling them there's still something here. So you had to make sure, the risk was worth it, because if you tell them that you're there and then they find you again, it could be bad news. It was always calculated. They always wanted to calculate the risks of things like that.
To practice all of this that we're talking about, the U.S. during the Cold War had a naval destroyer school, and they had a naval submarine school. The submarine school is around Groton, Connecticut, or was. I don't know if it's still there or not. The destroyer school was out of Providence, Rhode Island. KIDD was a training ship out of Providence for a while, a school ship. And there's a documented instance where she's undergoing exercises with one of the submarines out of Groton. She's supposed to just be sitting, just tooling around on the surface and, amongst all the marine traffic. And the submarine is supposed to be doing the work. Of course, they're turning that exercise to our advantage so our people can be trained as well. They pegged the submarine already. Submarine is trying to sneak in on them, does something pretty sneaky. One of the big freighters is coming through, and the submarine is trying to sneak in under the freighter, have the signatures merge, and get past KIDD and on the other side of KIDD without being detected. Of course, KIDD saw her before the merger started, and they realized he's about to hit the freighter. And sure enough, all of a sudden you start hearing the freighter, bah, bah, signaling that there's been a collision. They had the periscope up watching KIDD, and the freighter ran over the periscope and scraped the sail up. Now there's a court of inquiry. You've got the tapes from the sonar, let us have them. And the submarine got angry. The captain said that KIDD should have warned him about what was happening. And that didn't hold water. Navy's like, KIDD, go back to Providence. You're done with this. And they proceeded with the captain's mast.
They do that in the movie Down Periscope.
Yep.
And it is possible to do, but as Tim just said, it's very, very dangerous.
Very risky.
Yeah, to all you submarine captains out there, you only want to do it when you have to. If it's just an exercise or something, probably shouldn't try it.
So we're going to throw up a couple of pictures of some of these exercises, and in these instances, whoever was skippering the subs actually did well, and they got in close to KIDD, close enough that through the periscope camera you can see the 661 and the details on the main deck. So enjoy those pictures. I know none of KIDD's crew enjoyed those pictures because that meant they didn't get the threat before it got to them. Similar to our exercises with North Carolina, where North Carolina shot us, by the way. Hi, North Carolina. How are y'all doing? I'll never let them forget it. So let us know if you have questions about sonar down in the comment section. Thanks for hanging with us today. Evan, thanks for coming down. It's been a blast having you here the past couple of days. We'll see you next time.
You always want to let a person from a submarine get the last word.
Oh, really?
Thank you very much for watching us. And if you're in Cleveland, visit the USS KIDD.
And support the USS KIDD at usskidd.org. They've already been to dry dock. We're in dry dock. So go support Cobia right now. She's in dry dock. And everybody else that's going to be going to dry dock. Thanks a lot, guys.